Jesse Owens, a humble African-American athlete, draws the attention of Ohio State University's coach, Larry Snyder, during a period of racial prejudice, discrimination, and anti-Semitism. It all starts in the early 1930s, where Jesse Owens, a young black man, is running through the streets and slums of Cleveland, Ohio. Jesse walks into a shabby house and starts packing instantly, since he's the first man in his family to go to college. After packing his running shoes and all the essentials, Jesse's mom, who is very proud of her first boy going to college, hands him a hand-tailored blazer, which Jesse thinks is too expensive. Jesse says goodbye to the family and gives his dad an envelope with $2. The scene changes to a large college stadium where a track race is going on, but unfortunately, things aren't looking good for the coach Larry Snyder. Word has been going around that at this point the coach is only concerned about losing his job, since he hasn't had any national wins in a long time. Back in his office, the coach is upset and cranky when his secretary approaches him with a handful of his appointment files of fresh blood, meaning the potential track stars, and not to our surprise, Jesse Owens is among them. On the other hand, Jesse has planned to go see his girlfriend and daughter before he leaves for college. Ruth works at a salon, and seeing Jesse there, her boss doesn't look happy, so they get out of the salon to talk. Jesse tells Ruth that things are going to be better and that he'll come back to marry her. He says goodbye and jumps on the bus. They are off to go. At college, Dave and Jesse are running on the track while Coach Larry, who has now seen Jesse's profile, secretly times him to figure out if he's actually good. Dave and Jesse then head over to the shower, but as they are walking in, the all-white walks in and ridicules both of them by passing racist comments. Dave gets a little angry, but Jesse, not wanting to get in trouble, accepts it as his lot. Moments later, a young man appears and tells Jesse that the coach wants to see him. At the office, while the coach is trying to have a conversation with Jesse, he is unable to look him in the eye since he's not used to being treated in a good way by the white people. After some small talk about Jesse's past and his victories, the coach asks Jesse if he could win, and by that he means if he could work. Jesse, who is still quite nervous, is unable to answer, and that's when the coach then tells Jesse to work on his manners and that he should be looking a man in the eye when he's talking to them. Jesse gathers up courage to look him in the eye and tells the coach that he can work and his records speak for that. But Larry believes that records have no worth. Any kid can come along and take them away from you. What really matters are medals. No one can ever take those away from you. He then asks Jesse if he's willing to go to Berlin for the Summer Olympic Games, and of course, Jesse wants that more than anything, but there's a condition. The coach needs full commitment from his side, and he goes on to say that you belong to me. Larry then tells him to show up at 9 in the morning, the next day. On the track, the coach times Jesse on the 100-meter dash, and while his starting position isn't the best, he's really fast and the coaches are very impressed. In New York City, the United States Olympic Committee is in a meeting since they are concerned about the rumors coming out of Germany under the Nazi government and aren't sure if they should boycott the 1936 Games in Berlin. So, after a discussion, they decide to send Avery Brundage, who is reluctant, to move forward with the Games and not pay a lot of attention to Jewish problems and racial discrimination. Back in Ohio, Jesse is training hard with a bunch of other athletes and has even started working at a service station to raise some money. He tells Ruth about his struggles along with the news that he applied for the marriage registration in a letter, but when Coach Larry finds out that he's been missing practice, he gets mad. That's when Jesse tells him about the job and the fact that he has a daughter to raise. Avery Brundage reaches Berlin and is escorted to the stadium that is still under construction. He notices that Jews are being tossed out of their home and there are signs everywhere saying, "German defend yourself," and other anti-Semitic propaganda. Avery then meets Dr. Joseph Goebbels and a few other officials and tells them what the Olympics would look like without Americans. He also accuses them of using the Olympics to sell their nasty ideas about Jews. The officials understand his perspective and an agreement is formed where press will be reined in, anti-Jew signs taken down, and they'll stop throwing people out of their homes. In Ohio, Jesse is called in by the coach, who gives Jesse a legislative page ID. A job that pays him $60 a month, and in return, all Jesse has to do is train well. This is when the real training starts. Larry is training Jesse to start low and improve his form. Larry teaches Jesse that the lower he is, the faster he can run, but unfortunately, even on the track, Jesse is getting ridiculed by the white players, which makes him distracted. Larry notices it, and after practice, Larry provokes them into hurling and teaches Jesse a lesson, which is to block them out. Later, Jesse celebrates with some friends and hurts himself. The coach gets angry at first, but then tells him that all he has is 3 days. It's been 3 days and it's finally time for the Big Ten of 1935. While Jesse, who's still hurt, insists on competing. Jesse takes his place on the track and uses the blockout lesson and wins the race in 9.3 seconds on Larry's watch. However, the officials just weren't ready to accept a new world record and insisted that his time was actually 9.4 seconds. Larry is pissed and starts arguing with the officials. Jesse calms him down and tells him to let it go. Next up is the board jump. Jesse goes up to an official and asks him what the world record is, and moments later, he makes the jump and sets a new world record. Up next is the 200-yard race, and Jesse sets a new world record in that too. And finally, in the second hurdle race, Jesse sets another world record. At this point, the crowd has gone bonkers. Back on the drive home, Jesse is super excited about his wins when Larry breaks the news that Jesse has also set a new school record which previously belonged to the coach himself. That's when Jesse quotes Larry's own words and says, "Well, you know what they say about records. Some kid will come along and snatch it away from you." The scene changes to June 25, 1935, where Ohio State is competing in Los Angeles. As the bus pulls up, the press is waiting for the team, especially Jesse. They ask him how it feels to be the fastest human in the world. Well, it must feel good since Jesse managed to smoke the competition in LA. Later that night, Jesse and a bunch of other people go to a club to celebrate. That's when a girl named Quincella, knowing who Jesse is, approaches him. She's got trouble written all over her, but unfortunately, Jesse falls for her. In Germany, Avery is busy following up his request for the Berlin Olympics when he is presented with an opportunity to build the new German embassy. They assure him that it's not a bribery and Avery accepts the deal. On the other hand, Jesse is now dating Quincella, and while they are in Nebraska, Jesse receives a telegram from Ruth, who apparently has seen Jesse with his new girl and is threatening to sue. Jesse tries calling her, but she doesn't want to talk. Jesse, who is upset and distracted, loses to Ulyss Peacock at his track meet. The coach notices and inquires, to which Jesse tells him that he's just having a bad day. Later, when the team is loading up to go back to Ohio, Quincella shows up to go with them, but Jesse breaks up with her. Back at home, Jesse, who is still in the middle of a pity party, walks over to the salon where Ruth works to apologize to her. Nervous with a lot of people gawking at him, apologizes to her and proposes to her again. He tells her that he wants them to get married right now and runs off to find someone to perform the wedding for them. In New York, the U.S. Olympic Committee is all set to vote, and while Avery is encouraging everyone to vote in favor of going, Jeremiah Mahoney tells them to vote against participating. The voting closes with 58 in favor of going and 56 in favor of a boycott. In Ohio, a rep of the NAACP shows up and tries to convince Jesse into not going to Berlin since they need to show the Nazis that their discrimination is intolerable. Back at school, while everyone is listening to a boxing match between a Nazi and an American, Larry says that in 3 weeks' time, they would be beating Nazis at the Olympics. That's when Jesse tells him that he's not sure if he's going. Later that night, the coach is drinking and hurts himself while doing a broad jump. The next morning, while Jesse is jogging, Larry shows up again and encourages Jesse to at least go to the Olympics trials. Jesse takes Larry's advice and qualifies for 3 events. At the press meet, the topic of conversation keeps switching from sports to politics, and Jesse is concerned about how he's going to participate given the discrimination. On his way back, Jesse runs into Ulyss Peacock, who has apparently torn his hamstring and is never going to run away. He suggests Jesse that he should go to Berlin and stick it to Hitler. At the hotel, Jesse is having a hard time figuring out what he should do and is unable to sleep. Ruth tells him to stop thinking and just focus on running. In the morning, Jesse packs up and gets on the boat. He's happy to see Coach Larry there, so he turns to him and starts talking. That's when Jesse finds out that Coach Larry is in steerage with him and Jesse on his own dime. In July 1936, the American team arrived in Berlin and were given the royal treatment. Everyone's a little surprised since there are no colored dorms or tables and everyone sits together even during dining. And while Jesse and Dave are all set to train, the US team coaches are mean and racist. Moments later, Larry catches up with Jesse and asks him if he told the dean that he's not fit to train fleas on a dog. They are then ambushed by other coaches while the dean demands an apology. Jesse insists on Larry being his coach or he's not participating, and eventually, Larry is instigated as a coach. Larry tells Jesse that if he really wants to thank him, he should get him 3 gold medals. He asks Jesse about his new shoes, but Jesse says they never showed up. Larry goes looking for the shoe shop and ends up walking up on a group of Nazi soldiers forcing a Jewish family into a military truck. The soldier guides him off, but he can't stop looking back at the truck. On the morning of the Olympics, Larry can't stop fussing over Jesse while he is super calm. Larry escorts Jesse to the stadium that is huge and filled with people. Everyone stands as Hitler enters the stadium. Jesse prepares himself for the track. He wins the 100-meter dash and easily gets his first gold. Avery congratulates him and takes Jesse to meet Dr. Giabel and several other high-ranking Nazi officials. They are then informed that they won't be able to meet Hitler since he has already left. Later, the team has a small party to unwind for the day when Jesse gets a glimpse of the famous broad jumper Carl Lewis Long. Larry goes over the rules they have about broad jumping, but Jesse seems distracted. At the qualifying event, Jesse gets fouled for stepping over the line. The second attempt also goes in vain, but he eventually qualifies in his third attempt as Lewis helps him by putting a towel at the side of the jumping lane. Finally, the broad jump comes down to Jesse and Lewis. Jesse passes Lewis with a distance of 7.74 meters on his first jump, 7.94 on his second, and while Lewis unfortunately stumbles in his third attempt, Jesse lands an 8.60 meter jump, making a new Olympic record. After the medals are awarded, Lewis suggests they take a lap of honor and goes around the track arm in arm with Jesse. Later that night, Jesse gets beers and takes them to Lewis's room. Lewis tells Jesse to win the 200-meter dash not for any political agendas but for him. The next morning, back at home, everyone gathered around radios to listen to the live streaming of Jesse's race. While the filmmaker goes up to the bigwig box so she can catch the reaction of Hitler and Dr. Giabel as Jesse easily wins his third medal. After the race, Avery and Ms. Riefenstahl find themselves alone with Dr. Giabel. She went to insist that they cannot tell her crew what to do when Dr. Giabel asks her to translate for him as he tells them that the Nazis are offended that their guests have not treated them with respect and tells Avery that Marty and Sam can't run in the 400-meter relay race. Avery disagrees with them, but Goebbels reminds him of the business deal they have and Avery is forced to cave. The US team holds a quick meeting to tell the runners that they need to change up the lineup. Sam and Marty are out while Dave and Jesse are in. Sam and Marty call bull and that they know it is about the fact that they are Jewish. Jesse, in order to support Marty and Sam, says that he won't run the race unless he gets permission from them. At the arena, Coach Larry is in deep thoughts when Jesse joins him. They get to talking, and the coach talks about flying airplanes. He says that what spectators like most is not the thrill of the takeoff and flight, but of the potential crash. Turns out he crashed his plane before the 1924 Olympics, and woke up 3 weeks after the crash with a newspaper clipping about the gold medal winners. He then gives Jesse the clipping and leaves. Jesse opens it and sees that across the news story is written "next time." That night, Sam and Marty go to Jesse's room and tell him not to lose the relay race, giving him permission to run it. That next day, at the relay race, the team set a new world record of 39.8 seconds. While Hitler doesn't show up for the race. Later, Jesse is packing up his room, and his 4 gold medals, when Coach Larry comes in. He looks one of the medals over and smiles, proud of Jesse. Ms. Riefenstahl shows up and asks Jesse for a favor. She wants to film him doing the broad jump. She says it is so that people will never forget what he did. Back home in New York City, Coach Larry, his secretary Peggy, and Jesse and Ruth Owens are going to a special, formal dinner held in Jesse's honor. Sadly, Jesse and Ruth are told they will have to use the service entrance. Larry is angry but Jesse calms him down, and they go to the service entrance while Larry goes through the front door. When they get to the service elevator, a young fan asks for Jesse's autograph. That said, this is it for today's recap. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.